rioting started. That's when I started my little rioting.
Her experience was the living embodiment of human rights. If you're black, you're acting as a female. The law's against you, society's against you, everything was against you in those days.
Marsha was having a very rough time and sat there and just said, you know, I don't know if I should take a shower or go to Bellevue. And I think she took a shower.
Marsha was a subculture within a subculture. It didn't bother her. She didn't hide from it. You know, she met it. She met it head on.
Roy was a young hooker, 18 years old when I met him, and he mentioned Marsha, that he went to the village and hung out with Marsha. And I said, I don't think Marsha's the kind of person you should want to hang out with.
Marsha, when I saw her in the flowers, just getting crowned holy by people from India. She knows something that I don't know.
I met Marsha on Christopher Street, and the first time I saw her, I said, who is this person?
I remember seeing Marsha walk down the street in a miniskirt that he had made with nothing on underneath, and it was clearly see-through. Clearly.
And she'd be coming up Christopher Street with the roll-down stockings, fuzzy slippers, her Wigan beer can rollers. Hello, everybody! What a wonderful morning!
Over the top with the jewelry, flowers in her hair, very creative looking, very commanding of attention, not wanting to get it, but just getting it anyway.
I always remember knowing Marsha P. Johnson. I must have known her before I was 9 or 10. Maybe younger. She would hang out with my father a lot in the kitchen. I remember them spending a lot of time talking in the kitchen. And when my father would leave, if he would leave to go do an errand or if he would leave to do something, she would stay with me. So in some ways, I guess you could say Marsha P. was a babysitter of mine.
Marsha's like a bodhisattva. Her presence on Sheridan Square or on Christopher Street or wherever she stopped and asked for spare change or chatted with people. It was a religious, holy experience, and all of us who did drag or partial drag always admired her and thought of her as a patron saint.
She had this kind of glow about her. She's like an angel. Her spirit shined through her.
My father thought that her heart was in the right place, that she was someone to be trusted. I mean, she'd always take $5, but she would always say, and I'm going to give you back 20, Tony. And she meant it. She meant it because she had a generous heart and a generous spirit, but also because she was convinced she was going to get this billionaire boyfriend. And she was going to be living great with him.
Marsha was one of those colorful New York characters that you would see bouncing around the piers or the village in plastic and lame and glittery things and hoop earrings. And I always wondered who was that, and she always said hello. And I did a little research at the time, and it turned out she wasn't just a kook. She was a serious activist and entertainer.
She floored every audience. They just adored her. And I kept wondering, what the hell is it?
When I think of Marsha P. Johnson, I think of someone who kids today who are gay know nothing about, which is a shame, really, because she's one of the reasons they are sitting in all their liberated glory today. But Marsha paid the price for who she was.
I was young, but I was young and naive when I started wearing dresses at 5 years old. I stopped for a long time because the boys next door used to try and get fresh with me, you know, try and have sex. Honey, I don't believe you should have sex until after you're married. I found out that boys do have sex when I was raped by this boy who was about, he was about 13 years old. And he put me in between my legs and, you know, he shot all this sticky stuff all over my legs. And I somewhat knew that boys had sex with boys because the boy next door and they used to jerk off together, you know. And we used to rub each other's stomach. But that was a little childish thing when I was about 12 years old, you know. But I didn't think they'd actually stick it in or want you to stop it or anything. I didn't think people had sex, period. I'm still like that. I think, oh, he wouldn't do that. Oh, no, he wouldn't lick that man's toes. Oh, no. He wouldn't eat that girl wouldn't eat that girl out. That guy wouldn't eat that girl out. I know do not think like that, but I know that they would when I go to the movies. Honey, I don't believe you should have sex until after you're married. Or at least that's the way I would, think it should be. I got married to Jesus Christ in church when I was 16 years old and still in high school. And I haven't married anybody in church since then. Because I think he's the only man I could really trust. It's like a spirit that follows me around, and helps me out my hours and need. And listens to all my problems and never laughs at me. He takes me very seriously. I started coming to New York and meeting painted queens, and I didn't meet drag queens, as you would say, drag queens, until like in early 60s.
That the world was so different then was gay people were scheduled for non-existence. In other words, we were supposed to have no reality called gay, homosexual, except to be in a mental institution getting shock treatments or getting fired from a job.
I knew her from the mid-60s and through the 70s, and Marsha always gave this blessed presence and encouragement to be who you wanted to be. Those who were a little too feminine were frowned upon, but Marsha and a few others would stand ramrods straight, shoulders back, head high, and present themselves, and that encouraged so many people, or gave happiness to people that said, I wish I had the guts to do that. She would sort of hold court in Sheridan Square and saying, we're in the village, we're free, live.
Queens that used to just wear a little bit of makeup and go out into the street in boys' clothes and turn dates.
There was no place as a safe haven for a gay kid. The only option you had was a bar, or to pick up a John to find a place that's safe for the night if you were a young, street kid, and it was cold out, or that was it. You really didn't have many options.
When I first met Marsha in the early 70s, Marsha was homeless. I know some of the girls would live in various places for short periods of time. They would get a hotel room, or the baths. She used to stay a lot, and there was a place in Brooklyn, a house in Brooklyn where the girls lived for a while, but none of those things lasted very long. Sometimes I really wondered how she got through it. And then I know she used to sleep in the movies too on 42nd Street. It was 99 cents before noon, so she'd get up there before noon and she would sleep up there if she needed a place to sleep. It was amazing. It really was amazing how he was able to survive and get through life without having a place to really call home.
Marsha had a following around town of people that, I go to the flower district, and they have these big tables where they sort lilies and things. Marsha would be sleeping under them. And I saw this more than once. And I would say to the guy there, why is she here? And the guy would just say, oh, she's holy. And there were all these people that had whatever was going on in their head. Marsha became this, and then she would stay there and they would give her, Marsha, the leftover flowers, tons and tons of daffodils.
Maybe she'd take her last $10 and go out the door and come back 20 minutes later with this big bouquet, $10 worth of flowers. And I'd say, Marsha, what are you doing wasting your last $10 on flowers? And she'd go in my back room and be putting them in her hair and making this incredible arrangement. She'd say, oh, don't worry, Mr. Wicker. She said, these flowers are going to make me a lot of money. And they would.
She walked around decked in flowers a lot, remember? That's where she get those to throw in.
Well, she always had flowers in.
Yeah.
She put Christmas lights in, and the Christmas lights lit up.
Roy was a young hooker, 18 years old when I met him. But make a long story short, he ended up staying here. I sort of took him in. He essentially became my adopted son. And one night, he said to me, it was very cold out, about 10 degrees. He said, could Marsha come and sleep here? Because, she doesn't mind sleeping on the floor. Marsha likes to sleep on the floor. Which I thought, now, Willie, you never lie. Why do you tell me a fib like that? And so I allowed Marsha to come in that night, and she was here for the next 12 years.
I've never, ever done drag seriously. I always just do drag. I never do it seriously. Because I don't have the money to do serious drag. Years ago, I used to have to get some of my stuff out of the trash can and bring it home and wash it. I've never been an extravagant type drag queen that can go out to very fancy store in town to buy expensive dress. I've always had to get my dresses donated, or I have to get them at a thrift shop or something like that, because those are the only ones that really got real nice stuff at cheap prices.
And her taking us to a Salvation Army and other thrift shops was an art form, because she knew for $5, maybe $3, you should be able to get yourself an outfit.
Unless, of course, you can get a friend that, has no address in college to donate it to you. And that's not too often, because once they see you and see how good you look, a lot of them go home and get on their dresses and try and come out looking twice as good.
Marsha had a long purple lilac gown that she favored. And by the time she finished fixing it, cut here and scissors here and a razor blade here for the bottom and gussied it up with glitter, and she favored that. I mean, I know that dress really got her working out. She wore that one for a long time.
Marsha lived with me here in Hoboken. Now, this is a high-rise building. Our apartment is always notorious as being the gay apartment because of the strange people that came and went. So I told Marsha, no problem living here, but you can't come and go from this building in drag, because I was afraid that would be pushing things too far. So she would wear bulky clothing and get on the PATH train, and then the dress would drop out from underneath the leather jacket. And by the time she hit Christopher Street, she would have transformed herself into a drag queen, except for these huge, clunky male shoes that were about size 12 or something.
She wasn't the kind of queen you questioned her drag, because she had very little. And, she wasn't well-dressed, coordinated kind of drag queen. She put on what was available and what, fulfilled her idea of being a woman to some extent. It was a very, very natural look, and all her own,
It was amazing to me that all these people held Marsha, and these were people from all over the world that I don't know what the concept was going on there.
She would go out and stand on the corner, and people knew her, and they'd take pictures with her, or she'd say, could you spare some change for a starving actress?
One of the great things about Marsha's friendliness is that there was no agenda to it. I had the feeling that she probably had no idea who I was, just like I didn't know who she was. But she always said hello. She always broke that wall and was friendly the way most New Yorkers aren't. Not because she wanted an item. She was just, on the surface, a really happy-go-lucky person.
Could you give me $1? Do you have $1 for a dying drag queen or a starving queen?
She was sort of a Robin Hood. She would ask for money from people who were in the street going by, and say, for instance, they would give her some money. 2 minutes later, she'd turn around and give it to somebody else who needed it. She'd say, here, honey, get yourself something to eat.
She would not argue or fight the people who insulted her. Why don't you get off Christopher Street? You're giving us a bad name.
She was like the mayor of Christopher Street. And the queens definitely crossed the street or went around the block with their johns. They wouldn't be caught up with her because they were too highfalutin. They had the look, but not the spirit. Marsha had the spirit.
She just didn't nod or acknowledge you. She turned around and said hello. She was always like that, which gave you a chance, even fleetingly, to know her. She was warm. So everybody knew Marsha. No one had anything bad to say about Marsha. Marsha was really well liked.
Bars and establishments 86'd her, and she said, if they don't want me in their establishment even to buy a soda or something, I'll go somewhere else. I don't look for trouble.
Homophobia in the gay community, she used to say that some of the queens treated their dogs better than they treated her. They would go by and say, what is it? She would say right to them, what do you care what it is? You're not giving it anything.
I didn't get into it right away. I was like a butch makeup queen, working in Greenwich Village, and then I started doing little different drag. And I started wearing little high heel shoes, and I started putting on stockings, and I started becoming a drag queen. I was one of the Stonewall girls, one of the first girls to ever come in drags to the Stonewall. 1969, when the Stonewall Riots started, that's when I started my little rioting.
When Jerry Hoos, who was the founder of the Gay Liberation Front, arrived at the Stonewall Inn that night, he was met by his friend John Goodman. And John Goodman told him that soon after Jackie Hormona started fighting the police, that both Marsha Johnson and Zazu Nova joined in.
I've been in gay liberation ever since it first started in 1969. I was in the Stonewall Riots.
After the riots, Morty Manford and Marty Robinson, both very important figures in the Gay Activist Alliance, both told Robin Sousa that Marsha Johnson was involved in starting the riots. The story that Robin Sousa then told me was that Marsha Johnson said, I got my civil rights, and then threw a shot glass into a mirror, and that started the riots. In GAA, this became known as the shot glass that was heard around the world. In this case, the mythology reflects the facts, and I think that when we weigh all the evidence together, we have to conclude it's extremely likely that she was among the first to physically resist the police.
A spark comes along and it's like near gasoline and it goes kabang, and that's what happened that night. And so don't ever think that if there were no Stonewall, that it would just be like it is now, because it was a horrible world before that. We were all runaways, and some of them were like 14 years old. Some people had scalding water thrown on them by their parents. People that couldn't go back home no matter what, and couldn't go back to school no matter what. And that group of people was the catalyst in the riot. It was the street kids who had nothing to lose that were the force that got it going. History isn't something that you look back at and say, oh, that's inevitable, that would have happened anyway. No, it happens because people make decisions that are sometimes very impulsive and of the moment, but those moments are cumulative realities.
Why are you here today?
Darling, I want my gay rights now! That's when I started my little rioting. I wanted to get into this fabulous little dress and this fabulous little hairdo here, and learn how to do makeup and come out. Because I found out that my body was worth the money in those days. I found out if you're a pretty boy or a pretty little transvestite, you can make a couple little dollars, and that's when I learned how to hustle. And then I found out the prettier you look as a little boy, or the prettier you look as a little boy made up as a girl, that's the most money you're going to make. And the best way to do it is with your own natural hair. Wigs and stuff like that were in the 60s, but the ones that used to make the most money was the boys that looked like girls and could wear their own hair with just a little bit of makeup and have a little hormone tits, because that's when the girls' hormones start coming out in the 60s, just before the Stonewall riot. And people were just starting to really get into it.
And I used to go down, and before it was as fancy as it is now, we all hung out there, we went sunbathing. And I would be sitting there, and suddenly Marsha would come along and grab my shirt. And say, she always called me by my two names, Bob Kohler. Never called me Bob, ever. And she said, Bob Kohler, give me, and she'd forgotten. And I said, Marsha, would you stop? And suddenly Marsha would be naked, stark naked, in broad daylight down at the pier. And I'd say, Marsha, so she, my father needs those clothes. And I would be hanging on to my clothes for dear life, and Marsha would be trying to get them off. And she would usually get just like a shirt at the most, and then she'd throw it in, and these were sacrifices to her father and to Neptune, who got all mixed up together.
Marsha only very rarely talked about her father. She did tell me once when she had looked into the river and seen her father at the bottom of the river.
She was making offerings of flowers and change to King Neptune as an appeasement to help her friends who are on the other side.
Then she would, after she settled all of that and sort of snarled at me for not giving all my clothing, she would go up Christopher Street, where she would be picked up about midway. I mean, somebody would see Marsha, naked queen walking up the street, and they would call, and they would take her away for about 2 or 3 months, and they would put an implant in her spine, of Thorazine, I think it was, and that would calm her down. Then she would come back. She'd be like a zombie for about a month, and then she'd be the old Marsha. I mean, back to Neptune and her father.
My first illness was my 5 mental breakdowns, which started in 1970. And then it started falling downhill. And it's been going up and downhill ever since.
Honey, I walked right down Andy Warhol's office and walked in.
He took some photos and then he made a group of silk screens, and it's called Ladies and Gentlemen. And he had me as a blonde with ponytail called Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman.
Well, Andy Warhol was the arbiter of what was fabulous, let's face it. When he walked into a room, you knew it was a room worth being in, and he would handpick by his visual sense who was worth capturing, whether in a painting or a Polaroid. For him to do a Polaroid of Marsha makes her legendary. It means she caught the eye of Andy Warhol. She was worth capturing. She was like this transgender version of a Campbell's soup can, but much prettier.
I was no one, nobody from Nowheresville until I became a drag queen. That's what made me in New York. That's what made me in New Jersey. That's what made me in the world.
We went on Christopher Street. They had a silk screen of Marsha, and they threw us out of the store. They called her Riff Raff. Really, we went to look at her silk screen. She was so proud of it, and we got thrown out of the store.
When I became a drag queen, I started to live my life as a woman.
Marsha's success in life wasn't something that suddenly happened because Andy Warhol did a portrait of her. Andy Warhol did a portrait of her after she literally had become a larger-than-life legend by having converted so many people into fans and friends to going out. She'd always say little things to people like, "Have a nice day." It seemed to me, I thought, well, but it's funny, those things must matter because she had a special way of making a little extra effort to be extra polite and nice to people. And that really made people love Marsha.
The people get lost in the telling of the story. They want the bigger picture, what's going to be there. That there was a riot and this is what happened. That there were drag queens. They don't really get into the individual people who were more than the Stonewall Riot. I mean, these were people that were bigger than life that walked the streets here.
And Marsha is like in the class of saint of gay life. Mm-hmm. I mean, like if you ever hear of this old Russian tradition that was called Fools for God.
Friends and many people who knew Marsha called her Saint Marsha because she was so generous and she was such a good person. A little queen would come up and say, "Marsha, that brooch is so beautiful." And Marsha would say, "Oh, you like it?" Take it right off and give it to her.
She was simple, pure. She had her bad days and she'd let you know it. She had so many breakdowns. And the gay community recognized she was a saint. That's never been done in their lifetime. It's so practical, too, you know.
Marsha was totally mad, but one of the most greatest geniuses on the face of the earth.
She was outrageous in a different manner, and she was noticed first for that. But talk then started about her activism. It made her very different. It made people think twice about her, and made people want to stop to talk to her, and made people listen.
I've been in gay liberation ever since it first started in 1969. I was one of the first drag queens to try and help the drag queens and other people have food at the Alternate U. Alternate U was one of the places that we first tried to help college queens open their doors to gay liberation. When I started getting in newspapers, on TV set for gay pride parades, I was one of the queens that helped feed the queens that were hungry. And I started the STAR House, but I didn't actually start the STAR House. Sylvia Rivera started the STAR House. And I was just one of the queens that was behind her, like the vice president of STAR.
I knew Marsha was very into political activity in the West Village in the 60s and the 70s. And the group of, I guess they were all transvestites, called themselves STAR. S.T.A.R. Street Transvestite Activist Revolutionary. Which made a lot of sense, and I thought it was kind of hilarious. Because they were all stars anyway.
Sylvia Rivera deserves all the credit for STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionary, because she was one of the people that was in the riots that got arrested a lot for gay rights.
One big thing in Marsha's life, and also in Sylvia's life, was that they had formed a group called STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. And they had managed to get some small-time mobster who ran a porno store to give them an apartment or something in the Lower East Side in this slum building, which for a few months they operated as a shelter for homeless transgender youth. And they felt that that was one of their great accomplishments in life. And actually that has ended up going into the history book because it was really the first time anyone had ever tried to make an outreach to homeless transgender community, especially youth that are kicked out of their home for being transgendered.
She was talking about nobody's representing her in her rights as a transvestite. Because they had all these gay men and all these gay women working at the gay center, but they didn't have any transvestites. She wanted to have her own group, and I think that was wonderful. And I hope someday she just gets her credit. I hope somebody writes a nice story about her someday.
Well, Marsha, how are you, darling? How's it going with Gay Pride Week?
Oh, well, it's going fine so far. I've got t-shirts on Christopher Street in case anybody's interested from 2 to 4 tomorrow. I'm doing my part in the gay movement this year to help raise money for the Gay Pride March. I was working as a waiter for Charles' restaurant, and all people used to do was sit there complaining about their hamburgers. And I said, honey, I'm not going to want to be a hamburger jingler for the rest of my life. I want to be a drag queen. I want to be one of the world's biggest drag queens. So I got an offer from the Hot Peaches in the 70s.
Anything went with the Hot Peaches. It really pushed the edge back when there was an edge to push. And it was sort of like the Cockettes goes maybe more theatrical and more legit.
As she became the proverbial hit.
And Jimmy was the original one who first came and asked me to be in theater, Jimmy Camicia.
Well, Jimmy Camicia, the leader of the Hot Peaches, he always saw talent underneath you, and he liked flamboyant people, and then he could bring it out. He could bring the talent out, and I thought he brought a lot of it out in Marsha.
Marsha was a very big performer. I mean, really very large on stage, and that doesn't ever come across on video. When I say she was big, the generosity of her spirit was always right there in front of the audience, and they adored it. It was not censored, it was not figured out, it was just there. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Marsha P. Johnson!
It's gonna take me to the moon. I'm gonna blow it up quite soon. I'm simply waiting for
The thing that audiences loved about her, you couldn't record it. You can't record the generosity of spirit. You know, you can't record kindness. It just didn't work. But when you saw it... We're now going to give you one more time, Love, by Marsha P.
Yeah, it's an arrow to an island. It's an onward to a down. It's an scarlet through the fire. It's an Dante straight to hell. Now let's not be pessimistic. I love is worth a try. Make no mistake, and let's escape. The price you pay is high. The price you pay is high. The price you
We're in London, and I gave her this little song to sing. Now, most songs are like 3 minutes long. This song was maybe 50 seconds. So, and she read it, the whole thing, you know. And she went out every night. It was a simple song, and she obliterated this song. I mean, it was a disaster. But they loved it. They went berserk. So one day I said to her, Marsha, this is a very short song. Let me go over it with you, so show you how to sing it properly. And, this way you go out there and it'll be really nice. So she said, okay. So I go over the song with her, and she gets it perfectly. She goes out that night, she sings it perfectly. Big round of applause. She comes off. I said, Marsha, that was great. Next night, she goes out on the stage. She ruins the number, just destroyed it. They go berserk. She came off stage. I said, Marsha, what happened? She said, they like it better that way. and they did.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, in case you didn't get the message, but I know you did, because I can see that this audience is the message. We have someone to sum it up for you, Miss Marsha P. Johnson.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am stay-at-home for you called Soul. You can count your karma if Nirvana is your goal. You can shake and you can rattle. You can rock and roll. You can be a Clark Kent or a Lois or an Alice down a hole. You can be a vampire on a mountain with a heart of stone black coal. You can be a leather angel on a sleek black Harley bike. Or a redhead screaming faggot or a dazzling dyke. You can lock yourself in a closet in a fine meat stove, but it really doesn't matter if you ain't got soul.
And the funny thing is, they kept writing in the paper, one of the best things in the show is Marsha P. Johnson, but we think she was having an off night.
That was one of the biggest hustlers in New York City. I used to make like $125 an hour working up on Broadway. I was in and out of those hotels like nobody's business.
The Hotel Dixie, which reformed and called itself the Carter Hotel, was a sleazy bag that some of us who were on 42nd Street, you could rent by the hour.
It had full of characters, and some of them not too, too wholesome. No, it was a dangerous life she was living. I mean, I lived a dangerous life, but you would not find me in the Dixie, I mean, these people really were on the edge.
I had so much trouble. It's a miracle I'm still here. I mean, how many people used to come and bring guns?
By the late 60s, probably around the 70s, because it was a very, very dangerous period. I mean, gays were beaten up just for wearing tennis sneakers, never mind a wig. And Marsha was the perfect target. Some boys that had nothing to do, roughs, had grabbed her wig and threw it into the river. And then she protested and complained. They threw her after. And I said, was she dead? They said, no, they just threw her in the river. But I just couldn't imagine being in that river and surviving. I said, she must have swum. I mean, there were things, layers of information about Marsha, She must be a good swimmer. She must not have hold on to a pier, and she certainly could climb very well, because the river may not look far away, but how do you get out of it? So I was fascinated by the story. Then when I saw her, she was fine. She never answered that. She just went, oh, that. When I tried to bring up the story.
I mean, how many people used to come and bring guns and pull guns out on me because they didn't think I was, I would tell them I was a boy and I was in drag. And I would tell them that I would go, like, hustling, and would they want to go out? And they say, yes, I want to go out. And then when they get up in the hotel, and I take off all my clothes, and I can't believe it's your boy. That I noticed me and couldn't sleep. I was a real woman, honey. I'm just a transvestite. And then I look in the mirror, and I said, maybe he could have thought I was. I don't know. I wouldn't be for sure, because I'd be so heavily painted. Maybe it's because of my voice. I don't know. Yeah, but just once in a while I would run into this lunatic who would actually have in his mind that I was a woman. And I mean, I'd tell them I was a boy, and they just wouldn't, they just wouldn't believe it until they seen everything down my pants and everything. Another day, another illusion. arrested about 1 million times for prostitution. From New York to Florida to California.
Marsha would frequently disappear for 4, 5, 6, 7 days at a time. And I'd say to Willie, where is Marsha? And he'd say, she must be in jail. And sure enough, about 10 days later, she would walk in because she had gotten a 30-day sentence. They always let her out after 10 days, even though she had 30.
I'm telling you, every time they pick you up for something like loitering, with the intent to prostitute or something like that most of the time, because a smart prostitute never goes out in the car and names a price. They always treat me like I'm the world's murderer, the highest murderer in the world. As though I was arrested. I mean, they think I'm out here to murder people instead of have sex with them for money. There's a P in my name also. They call me Marsha P, no mind Johnson. I try and pay a lot of little things that happen to me in life. Absolutely no mind.
It was Marsha P. Johnson, and the P stood for Pay It No Mind. Which Marsha once told the judge. I went down to bail her out of court, and Marsha was in the docket, and she came up, and Bruce Rice looked at it, and he said, Marsha P. Johnson. And she said, she had a very flat voice, we used to call it a field voice, and she said, yes, and he said, what does the P stand for? And she had the nerve to snap Judge Rice. She said, pay it no mind. And he said, well, that's exactly what I'm going to do. He said, get out of here. Go on.
Pay no mind Johnson. Marsha Pay no mind Johnson. I originally started the name Marsha P. Johnson is the drag queen name because I used to go down to 42nd Street and everybody used to call me Michelle. And I was a little boy, and I didn't think that was a nice name for a boy. That's where I got the name Johnson, from Howard Johnson's Restaurants. And I'm every year in a Stonewall car lately. There was a time when they didn't even want me in a Stonewall car.
Heritage of Pride, who runs the Gay March and the Gay Festival, tried to ban transvestites from the parade in like 1978.
And yes, there are fellow gay men who had cast an evil eye at you and said, oh, they're giving us a bad name.
Because after all, I mean, all you turn on TV, there was a gay pride parade and all they showed were the drag queens. So what Sylvia and Marsha did is they went ahead of the opening banner, and as two transvestites, I guess with some friends, they marched in front of the parade, so it made them end up leading the whole parade. So the committee decided, well, we've got to include transvestites in our parade.
Ed Murphy was the one that put me in the Stonewall car in 1980. He took me from the back parades and put me up front. But he evidently watched me through the years since 1969 and evidently thought that I had a right to be in that contingent of the parade and put me there. I never wanted to be there. I didn't care where I marched in the Gay Liberation Parade ever since it first started because I didn't think that was important.
Well, Marsha was born for a parade. I mean, look at her. So it was only natural she would go to the Gay Pride Parade. She was somebody who put her life on the line. People think, oh, the gay community just happened this way. It didn't. There were people like Marsha literally in the street, not just celebrating, but fighting for rights.
I think the important thing was that we got our gay rights all across America and across the world, and got the right to be human beings just like other human beings. I wanted to see gays at least have a start in life because they've never really had anything called a parade that was their own. You know, they always had to hide in the closet of somebody else's parade. Yes, I know tons of people that have been sick with me. I mean, I don't think that you should be ashamed of anybody, to have AIDS. I think you should stand as close to them as you can and help them out as much as you can. I'm a strong believer in that, and that's how come I try and do that for everybody I know that has the virus, including myself. I have HIV. I have HIV for about 2 years. I mean, from helping sick people with AIDS and stuff, that's how I wandered in the hospital. I just finished helping my roommate's lover who had died of AIDS.
Marsha lived here, and Marsha literally became the nurse for David. I had to go to work, and she was here all the time, and she would change the linens and come in once he fell off the couch, and she swept him up in his arms.
I had to sit in the room with him when he died, and that was very scary to me. And I had a breakdown, because I never had to sit in the room with anybody when they had died before. I thought that it would be screaming and hollering and everything, but you didn't do any of those things. You just stopped breathing all of a sudden. And so when I just had a breakdown and wanted to put in a hospital. Now they got 2 little nice statues in Charity Square Park to remember the gay movement. How many people have died for these 2 little statues to be put in the park to recognize gay people? How many years has it taken the people to realize that we're all brothers and sisters and human beings in the human race? I mean, how many years does it take people to see that? And we're all in this rat race together. I go to St. Mary's. I use Jesus Christ for most of my prayers, most of the time, because I use the church in Hoboken, and I go there every week and light a candle, or I used to go in and say a prayer, for people dying of AIDS.
She was very, very religious. A neighbor came in and told me that at 6 in the morning they had gone to the Catholic church across the street, and Marsha was prostrate on the floor in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary.
And I would find her in the strangest churches, and she'd be dressed in velvet, and she'd be throwing glitter. And she never would face the altar when she was praying. She lay prostrate facing the door, because she thought, you don't look at the altar.
I practice the Catholic religion because the Catholic religion is part of the Sangria of the saints, which says that we're all brothers and sisters in Christ.
Marsha would always say she went to the Greek church, she went to the Catholic church, she went to the Baptist church, she went to the Jewish temple. She said she was covering all angles.
I know people who think that I'm just a stupid little street queen out there begging for change on the street because there's nothing else she knows how to do. I always be now and then meet these young people that don't have nobody that wants to stick by them and help them, So I help them out with like a place to stay or some food to eat or a little change for their pocket. And they don't never forget it. A lot of times I've reached my hand out to younger people in the gay community that just didn't have nobody to help them out and they were down and out.
When she would take her last $2, Willie once said to me, we only had $2 and we bought a box of cookies. And by the time we walked down to the river, Marsha had given away all the cookies that we had spent our last $2 on. The reason for that is because Marsha had been hungry, had lived on the streets, and she knew that a chocolate chip cookie to a starving queen was a great gift.
I mean, every once in a while I just reach my hand out when I have extra dollars and I help somebody. I'm not going to have anything when I die because I don't have any clothes.
Jesus, with the loaf of bread and the fish, Marsha always had something to share. Not only her goodwill and thoughts, a bag of potato chips, she would just hand to the group of kids.
I got this dress. I'm just like Cinderella again. I have this one little tired dress, and I have this here dress just in case I meet my billionaire husband. And that's just the only 2 dresses I own in my whole life. I don't have to do the streets anymore because I decided, John, it wasn't worth it. I never ever had to do the streets in my whole life. I never had to have sex with anybody for money ever. I just only did it because I wanted to see if I could get away with it. And I pretty much succeeded. Yes, I got shot on the West Side Highway. I went out with a taxi cab driver, and the taxi cab driver fucked me, gave me $20, and let me get out of the cab. I went to run away from the taxi, and man pulled out a gun and fired. It was the most scariest thing in my whole life. I thought that I was dead that Sunday morning. I said, oh, the Lord is finally calling my name. I'm going home. But they couldn't get the bullet out. It was too close to the spine. Here's where they went in right over here. And the bullet still there after 12 years. I'm dying, but ain't dead yet. Being a hooker is no easy business for no one. It's one of the most dangerous businesses you can be in, but if that's the only thing you know how to do, I'd say it's a pretty sad story for anyone, including myself. But I think that I like the thought that somebody would want to pay me money. That's what kept me in the business for such a long time. I couldn't believe that my body would ever be worth anything to anyone. I thought that they all just thought that they could use me. But that's in a book of matches, They want to give you nothing, not even a cigarette or a cup of coffee, nothing whatsoever. I thought that was the life that I was going to be living as homosexual. A person just going out with people and having sex with them on the street, inside of a truck. And you have sex for 5 or 10 minutes, they get their rocks off, you get your rocks off, and that's it. I thought that was going to be my whole life story as a homosexual, which isn't that exciting. It's not like my mother said, you're going to meet this. I wanted to do what my mother said. My mother said, you're going to meet this billionaire homosexual when you grow up, and he's going to take care of you for the rest of your life. My mother said, being homosexual, she thought I was lower than a dog. She said, you're gay, you're lower than a dog. But see, my mother never knew much about homosexuality. All she knew was to see men dressed in women's hats and dresses and come to the bar. She never investigated, she never came to a gay pride march or anything. She didn't know that much about homosexuality. And her whole life she never wanted to know much about homosexuality. When I was 18 years old, honey, my mother didn't have to show me to do it. And I had my high school diploma, and that's all I needed in a bag full of clothes. Free at last, thank God Almighty, free at last. I had $15 for the bus to the Port Authority. I said if my mother could move out her own with nothing, $15 is certainly going to set me up in this world, little did I know. And I got out there, I learned to hustle, and I learned to go out with different men, and I waited on tables, and I learned how to survive. 1963, for better or worse. And I said, I got the Lord on my side, and I took him in my heart with me, and I came to the city, for better or worse. And he said, you might wind up with nothing, because, me and Jesus are always talking. And I said, honey, I don't care. I never have nothing ever till the day I die. All I want is my freedom. And that's how I came, and that's how I've been living here ever since I came, day after day, on whatever I have. I don't even care if I lose all these clothes tonight. Oh, John, I see myself in a house on Venus waiting for you to come and say hello. I'm not planning to live 20 more years. I don't want 20 more years of this wonderful life of disco and romance. They call me a legend in my own time because there's so many queens gone that I'm one of the few queens that's still left from the 70s and the 80s. But I'm not the only one. There's several legendary queens.
She was a bodhisattva, a holy person, a saint on street corners every day on Christopher Street. And people could walk past her, ignore her, and be blind to her. But those who saw her and understood, she is a reminder of what the village was and what other younger people can be.
Tomorrow night's the candlelight vigil. The candlelight vigil is for people who died of AIDS. And we've been having it for 7 years. And I just don't like to miss one because I never know who's next. I never know if it's going to be me or one of my best friends. And I like to say I think that all those people that died of AIDS should be remembered for all the courage they had in fighting the disease instead of just laying down and dying, It's going to be the first year that we're marching down Fifth Avenue completely. I believe in as long as there's people with AIDS and as long as gay people don't have their rights, all There's no reason for celebration. That's how come I walk every year. That's how come I've been walking for gay rights all these years instead of riding in cars and celebrating everything. Because you never completely have your rights, one person, until you all have your rights. And I figure as long as there's one gay person that has to walk for gay rights, Don, all of us should be walking for gay rights. And if I die, I hope nobody cries either. I hope you stand up and dance, party, and have a good time.
That she were towards the end, she was getting more fragile. I think she was getting sicker. And I got a phone call and they said Marsha had come up from the bottom of the river. And it was true. Marsha may have hallucinated and thought she saw her father in the bottom of the river, or might have thought that she could walk home across the river to here in Hoboken on the water. You know, or she could have been harassed and jumped in the river to escape. We'll never really know it.
The word went out in the community that Marsha had been found in the river and supposedly it was a suicide. And she had been harassed in that area. Obviously this was some kind of shady killing that had gone on. But unsurprisingly, the cops just twiddled their thumbs and said, no, it's a suicide. It's a black gay person. We don't care. We're not going to investigate any further. And everybody was outraged.
When we gave Marsha the funeral up at the church, we hadn't counted on hundreds of people coming. The church was packed. They had to stop the people from coming in. And it was going to be carried down to the river. Well, we had arranged to go on the sidewalk, but I looked around and there were literally hundreds and we couldn't. So I went outside, I talked to one of the police, whom I knew. I had a store on Christopher Street, so I knew most of them. I said, look, our family, I can't do it. You know, you've got to give me the street. And he said, we can't give you the street. You need a permit, yada, yada, yada. I said, look, it's for Marsha. And the head cop looked and he said, Marsha was a good queen. He said, go ahead, give them the street. And we got the street for Marsha's funeral. So it was that kind of effect that Marsha would have, which Tommy is talking about. People you wouldn't expect, a chief of police, to suddenly close down 7th Avenue because Marsha Johnson was going to be carried down to the river.
Take care, y'all. Thank you for all your support. Tomorrow. Thank you for all your support. Well, you know. But tomorrow, watch this outfit, the blue thing. But tomorrow we got a different color. I swear. Take care. I will be working.